Hey everybody, in this video we'll be setting up a minimal C++ CMake setup for building Dear ImGui applications with SDL as the backend. So I'm going to pull up my terminal now. I'll be using the terminal to run shell commands and Vim to write code. You're most welcome to use any other text editor or IDE of your choice. So I've got my terminal here. We'll start by creating a directory for our project. I'll call it SDL ImGui starter template. I'll navigate into it. Now I'm going to create a couple directories. So I like to have my source files in the SRC directory, all the external dependencies in the vendors directory, and put all the build files in the build directory. So I'm going to create that now. So I'm going to say mkdir build src and vendors. So I'm going to just list that. The vendors folder holds the dependencies, and we have two dependencies here, which is SDL and ImGui. So I'm going to create directories for each of them inside the vendors directory. So I'm going to say cd space vendors, I'm going to say mkdir SDL and ImGui. I need CMake file for each of them and one for the vendors directory. So I'm going to say touch CMake list.txt from the vendors directory. I've got that there. Now I'm going to create a CMake list.txt for ImGui and SDL each. So I'm going to say touch ImGui, SDL / CMake list.txt. You can manually do this, it's completely fine. And if I check that, I've got CMake for each of the directories, which is ImGui and SDL. Now we'll go one step back. So I'm going to say cd space .. create the root CMake file. So I'm going to say touch CMake list.txt for the root project, and one for the SRC too. So I'm going to say cd space SRC touch to the same here, and ls. Okay, we got that there. Now I need a main.cpp file for our project. So I'm going to say touch main.cpp. So we'll go one step back. So say cd space .. ls and hit enter. Now if you look at this is all we need to start. So this is like a pretty clean and minimal setup. All the project files will go into the SRC directory. Any external dependency that we need to handle will go inside the vendors directory. So I'm going to start with the root CMake list.txt file. I'm going to open it with Vim. I'm going to say Vim CMake list.txt. Set the minimum CMake required version. So I'm going to say CMake minimum required is version 3.22. I'm going to give it a project name. So I'm going to say project ImGui app. Add the two directories that we have, which is vendors and SRC. So I'm going to say add subdirectory vendors and copy that. I'm going to say SRC. Now this is all we need in the root CMake list.txt file. I'm going to move on to the vendors directory now. I'm going to say cd space vendors and open up the CMake list.txt file of vendors directory. So I'm going to say vim CMake list.txt. Add the subdirectories ImGui and SDL in here. So I'm going to say add subdirectory. I'm going to say SDL and copy that. I'm going to say ImGui. That's all we need for the vendors CMake file. Now let's move on to the CMake file of the SDL directory. So I'm going to close that. I'm going to go to SDL and open that up. So now let's fetch SDL using CMake FetchContent. So I'm going to say include FetchContent to include the FetchContent module. I'm going to say FetchContent declare to create a declaration. I'm going to give it a name SDL3, say git repository and repository, and say git tag. I'm going to pull the git repository and git tag from Chrome. So I'm going to open this up. I'm going to say GitHub SDL. Head over to the first URL. Copy this HTTPS URL in here. Come back. Paste it in here. Now I'm going to choose a git tag. So I'm going to choose the version 3.2.0. So I'm going to head over. Let's say release 3.2.0. and that should do it. So this is all we need to fetch SDL from GitHub and include it in our project. So now that we've set up SDL, let's move on to setting up ImGui. So I'm going to go one level back, go to ImGui, open the CMake file. Let's set up ImGui now. So I'm going to say include. I'm going to say FetchContent, create a declaration using FetchContent declare, give it a name as ImGui, put in the Git repository and Git tag. I'm going to pull that from GitHub, so I'm going to say GitHub ImGui. I'm going to pull the URL. I'm going to put that there. For Git tag, I'll be using the docking branch, and I'm going to say fetch content make available ImGui. We did forget the fetch content make available line for SDL, so we're going to fix that now. So I'm going to copy this, open the CMake list.txt file of SDL. I'm going to copy that there. I'm going to say SDL3 instead of ImGui, and that fixes it. Because ImGui does not support CMake, there's a couple more additional stuff to do. So we're going to create ImGui as a library. So I'm going to say add library ImGui, and we need to add the sources and include directories. So I'm going to say target include directories, and I'm going to say ImGui, and we'll say add target sources. We'll add in a moment. So we're going to say ImGui, and we need to link ImGui against SDL. So I'm going to say target link directories, target link libraries. I'm going to say ImGui, I'm going to say public, I'm going to say SDL3 : SDL3. Now let's work on the include directories part. So let's head over to GitHub for a moment, and there are two places in which we have these header files. One's in the source directory, and other is in the backends directory. So we'll add that. So I'm going to say ImGui public, and just make it capitalized, and say ImGui source dir. That's where we have a couple of header files, and we have a couple of header files in the backends directory. So I'm going to copy this and say backends. And that's all we need for include directories. Now let's add the required source files, or the CPP files. If you take a look at GitHub, so I'm going to say, if you look at these are the required CPP files that we need. So let me just split my screen, and we'll go ahead and add these CPP files. So I'm going to say, I'm going to put in public there, and I just come back and say ImGui source directory. Just do that and say ImGui.cpp. Just make a couple of copies, and let's just say ImGui demo.cpp, and ImGui draw.cpp, ImGui tables, and let's say ImGui widgets.cpp. We need two more files, and that's inside the backend, which is basically the SDL backend. So if you take a look at this, we're using SDL3. So we have this ImGui implementation SDL3 file. So I'm going to copy that and say ImGui impl_SDL3.cpp, and we need the render SDL3 renderer. So if you look at these, I'm going to copy that once more and say ImGui implementation SDL3 render3.cpp, and that's it for the source files. We made a slight mistake here. The name of the file is SDL render3. We're going to remove that, and that fixes it. Now that completes our ImGui setup. Now we're going to copy a example application from the examples provided by ImGui. So I'm going to head over to GitHub and find the examples folder, find the example_SDL3 folder, grab the main.cpp file, and now we have an example application to run. So we'll start working on the CMake list.txt file of the SRC folder. This is where we'll be building the executable. Now let's start working on the CMake list.txt of the SRC folder, which will take care of building the executable. And the first thing I like to do is setting the binary path. And I like putting binaries in the build/bin directory. So let's do that first. So I'm going to say set, I'm going to say CMake runtime output directory, and put it inside CMake binary directory /bin, and that will take care of setting the executable inside the build/binary directory. And let's add our executable. So I'm going to say add executable. We'll provide a name for the executable. So I'm going to say my app, and provide the main.cpp file. So I'm going to say main.cpp. And our application requires ImGui and SDLs, and so we need to link those. So I'm going to say target link directories, so target link libraries, and say my app public, or let's just say private, and give SDL:/SDL3, capitalize it, and say ImGui, and that's all we need to build the executable. We missed something in the ImGui CMake list.txt file. So if you take a look at these two files, they come from the backends folder. So we're going to add that. I'm going to say ImGui source directory /backends. Same with the implementation file. So now that we've completed our setup, let's go ahead and build the executable. I'm going to move to the build directory, say CMake space ... and -g Unix make files. If you're using Ninja, you might want to say Ninja in here. Now it's going to create the required build system files. It's going to take a little bit of time. So CMake is completed creating the build files. To create the executable, I'm going to say make, and it's going to take some time to build the executable. So our executable has been built, and to open the executable, I'm going to say cd space bin and say /my app, and there we have our executable.